Members of the court, ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you all to take your seats so we can begin our luncheon festivities? Will do. Excellent, thank you. So if you all take your seats, as is customary, we will begin our program during the dessert phase of the luncheon. So thank you all very much for coming. It's wonderful to see so many of you in person again. We look forward to a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, and we'll be talking to you during dessert. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? I know that some of you are still finishing your main course and dessert is yet to be served, but I see that it's 12:45, and Wally Riley, who I hope is looking down on us from above, is saying to us, you need to be done by 1:30. So we intend to honor his wishes. Let me first introduce myself. I'm Carl Herstein. I have the privilege of being the president of the Michigan Supreme Court Historical Society. And I would like to recognize the members of the board of directors in attendance by asking them to please stand so that they can be recognized. Thank you all very much. We'd also like to thank our table sponsors. We wouldn't be able to have this event without our generous table sponsors. This year we would particularly like to thank the Clark Hill Law Firm, Dickinson Wright, Kinebaum, Hardy, Viviano, Pelton, and Forrest, and Kitch, Wagner, Drutchess, Villatuti, and Sherbrooke. Thank you very much for your support. I believe we also are pleased to have with us the University of Michigan Law School Student Prize winner, James Kerwin. James, are you in attendance? James is the editor-in-chief of the Michigan Journal of Law and Society, the nation's first law school journal to focus on the intersections of law, history, and the social sciences. Our society, as you may know, gives prizes each year to a student at each of the state's law schools for their performance in legal history or, where there's no legal history program, appellate advocacy. Your membership dues support this and all of our other programs for which we are most appreciative. We'd like to thank you all very much for attending this event and supporting the work of the Society, which, as you know, supports our oral history and now oral and video history project, our care for the outstanding portrait collection of all the former justices of the Supreme Court that grace our Hall of Justice, as well as some of the offices here in Detroit. Our work in providing lesson plans for high school students, our work at the Hall of Justice with respect to the Learning Center, which is enjoyed by many, our scholarly programs that we support, and legal research with respect to the work of the Society, and many other things which you, I hope, can learn about by looking at our ever-growing and more extensive Michigan Supreme Court Historical Society website. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Chief Justice Bridget McCormick. Chief Justice McCormick joined the Michigan Supreme Court in January 2013 and became Chief Justice in January 2019. She also continues her scholarly work teaching at the University of Michigan Law School, where she's been on the law school faculty since 1998 and is responsible for the development of the school's outstanding clinical programs. At the court, she's continued her legacy of innovation and improving access to justice. She now serves on and chairs so many significant groups at the state and national level that it would be exhausting merely to list them. So instead, please join me in welcoming Chief Justice McCormick.
Thanks, Carl, for the kind introduction. Thanks to the board of the Historical Society for all of your work. I understand Carl doesn't pay you. Sorry about that. And thanks to everybody else for being here. I know this is twice this term. I think of years as like Supreme Court terms, and we were here in October, we're here in May, and Carl tells me next year we'll be here 3 times. So I'm just kidding, don't worry. It is my pleasure to introduce my colleagues, and I will start with Justice Brian Zara, but I don't know where you are sitting, Justice Zara. Justice David Viviano, here in the front. Justice Bernstein sends his regrets. He's sorry to miss you, but he's on the other side of the state at another event. Justice Beth Clement is somewhere in the back. Yes. Justice Megan Kavanaugh is here somewhere. Oh, 2 at a table over there. Yeah. Got a twofer at the front table. And our newest colleague, Justice Elizabeth Welch, who we just have started letting out in public. So she's happy to be out in public. And we are delighted that we're also joined by Justice Maura Corrigan here at the middle table. Justice Steve Markman is here. And I think I saw Justice Marilyn Kelly come in. Yes, nice to see you, Marilyn. It is very weird to be here and not have Judge Avern Cohn yell at me about something. So I'm hoping one of you will just yell at me randomly on my way out about whatever you can think of. It'll make me feel better. I think a lot about history, how history will describe our profession at this moment, 30 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. All right, not a lot. I'm too busy. I don't think about it a lot. But I do think about it from time to time, and it'll be interesting. You know, if you dropped a surgeon from 1890 into a modern-day surgical theater, she would know exactly what to do. If you dropped a lawyer, I mean, she would not know exactly what to do. I take it back. She would think it was really confusing because there are all these like space-looking machines. If you dropped a lawyer from 1890 into a courtroom, it might look exactly like it did in 1890. It would in many places in Michigan. Medicine changed, as you know, significantly in the 30s. It was in the 30s that counties first figured out that they could aggregate their data and make better decisions about how to treat patients. So you didn't have to go with your gut if you were a doctor. You didn't have to say, you know, leeches worked last week, so we'll try leeches. You could actually look at the data and make decisions based on the data. And we've seen so much of that in law in the last few years. Court data is a little bit slower to catch up, but in the private sector, data is doing more and more in law. And medicine after the 30s, when they started aggregating data, changed in significant ways. Licensure changed, education changed significantly. And so I wonder if this will be that moment for our profession. We have seen incredible innovation and collaboration in the last 2 years, and I have no idea what changes we should take with us, and I don't think it should be for me to say. You all will figure that out as we go along. But one place where we've seen real exciting possibility are the changes that we've been able to make for the majority of our neighbors who have to navigate their justice problems without lawyers. The access to justice gains that we've seen in the last 2 years have been tremendous, especially here in Michigan, where the bar and the bench have really shown great commitment to innovating and collaborating to solve problems for people who need it most. And I could recognize all of my colleagues for excellent work. I want to specifically recognize Justice Zara for his leadership on the Justice for All Commission. They've done tremendous work in the last couple of years, and we're grateful for it. Whatever it is we take with us, I hope we will take that collaboration, that innovation, so we can continue to deliver for the people who need access to justice the most. Thank you again all for being here. I'm really looking forward to the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Justice McCormick. Now we have a special presentation of the Dorothy Comstock Riley and Wallace D. Riley Legal History Award from our Vice President, Larry Nolan, who's participating electronically via Zoom and who has a pre-recorded presentation to make, a first for the Society. So would you please begin the presentation of the recording.
Good afternoon. members of the Board of Directors, honored guests, members of the Michigan Supreme Court Historical Society, and our special guests. I welcome the members of Chief Justice Bridget McCormick and the associate members of the Michigan Supreme Court in attendance today. Thank you very much for your being here today. I know these have been difficult times in regards to the last couple of years with COVID. So, but it's been requested by President Carl Hursting to, as my role in co-honorary chair of the Dorothy Comstock Riley and Walter D. Riley Legal History Award, to make a presentation today to a very worthy and honored recipient. The Legal History Award has been awarded only 7 times previously. In 2002, it was awarded to Governor John Engler for the work he did in promoting the building of the Hall of Justice when he was governor, and the current chambers of the Supreme Court. In 2003, it was awarded to Dorothy Comstock Riley as a founding member of the society. In 2006, it was posthumously awarded to Rosa Parks. In 2008, Professor John W. Reed from the University of Michigan, and who had been a long-term member. In 2013, Wallace Riley. 2017, Charles Rutherford, all names that you're familiar with. And then in 2020, it was awarded to Judge Averin Cohn. As you are aware, it's not been given every year. In 2022, the presentation of this Legal History Award was arrived at a recommendation by the awards committee, of which I am chair, as well as on the committee is Ms. Lori Budewig and Mr. Mark Ben-Dewar, are members on the board. We concluded that we would recommend to the board of directors for approval the name of the individual who was to receive this award. And it was unanimously approved by the board for this person to be named the recipient. This person has been the longest serving member of the board of directors, and I've kind of let that cat out of the bag. Denise Langford Morris. Denise, would you please come forward to receive the 2022 Dorothy Comstock and Walter Riley Legal History Award. Denise, as all of you know, has just recently retired from the Sixth Circuit Court of Oakland County, where she served as Chief Judge Pro Tem in 2022. She was in the Domestic Relations Court from 1992 to 2000, and from 1992 to 2000 in the General Civil Case Division, in the business cases in 1992 to 2013, and as the general criminal cases from 1992 to 2022. Denise sat as a visiting judge in the Michigan Court of Appeals in 1996. As an assistant, she came up through the ranks. She went to Highland Park Community College while raising a family, got her associate's degree in 1973, and received her BA, a Bachelor of Arts, from Wayne State University in 1975. She went on and got her master's cum laude in guidance and counseling from Wayne State University in 1978, and got her law degree from the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law in 1982. She began work at the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office in 1984 through 1987, became a United States Assistant Attorney in the Eastern District, and basically has risen through the ranks and is well known by people, not just in the state of Michigan, but by those all over. For the National Bar Association, she's been appointed as a representative for the American Bar Association House of Delegates. Denise, I would like to congratulate you. I know that you've been on the board of directors as a member, willing to serve at anything that was ever requested for 27 years, since 1995 when you were appointed. I think you, without question, are now currently the longest serving member on the board. I think I was appointed in 1996, a year after you, but I have truly valued the relationship and coveted your guidance and counseling on the board, and have thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity to have gotten to know you. I would like to thank you, and I have promised to be brief and say congratulations. You are the 2022 recipient of the Dorothy Comstock Riley and Walter D. Riley Legal History Award. Thank you very much for allowing me to make this presentation, President Herdstein, and I hope that the luncheon is as the vignette is as enjoyable as it has been in the past. Thank you.
So as Vice President Nolan indicated, it's my great pleasure to give to our honoree, Denise Langford Morris, this award, Legal History Award, to someone who has not only helped for 27 years to preserve the history of the state of Michigan, but has herself been a maker of legal history in the state of Michigan. Congratulations, Denise.
I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am shocked and amazed at this. They can really keep good secrets on this board. And it's an honor to be with you again. I'm so glad that we're all here in person. And it's amazing, when you retire, you get more plaques. Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you.
So now I'd like to get to the final part of our program and begin the second in the series that we have named as the John Wesley Reed Lectures. Professor Reed, as many of you know, was an eminent scholar, Dean of the Wayne State University Law School, the Thomas Cooley Professor of Law at the University of Michigan, a brilliant essayist and speaker, and longtime member of the Society and a board member. His lectures remind us of his learning, his wit, and his commitment to professionalism and civility. I'm very pleased to introduce to you another professor and dean for our speech today, Dr. Martin Hershock. Dr. Hershock holds a PhD in history from the University of Michigan and is Dean of the College of Arts, Sciences, and Letters and Professor of History at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. A specialist in 19th century American political and social history, his very many outstanding scholarly works include The History of Michigan Law, co-edited with Paul Finkelman, which was named a notable book and the recipient of the Historical Society of Michigan State History Award, The Paradox of Progress, Economic Change, Individual Enterprise, and Political Culture in Michigan, 1837 to 1878, another award-winning book, and one for all of you who are interested in legal history, I highly urge you to read. It's a wonderful book. And as well, if you have any interest in a bracing reminder of the legal challenges facing a country even more divided than we are today. I would urge you to read his article, Copperheads and Radicals, Michigan Partisan Politics During the Civil War Era, 1860 to 1865, published in the Michigan Historical Review. His most recent published work focused on the role of African American troops in the Vicksburg campaign. Their conduct is said to have been most gallant. And currently, he is stepping out of his comfort zone to focus on the Detroit Federal Screwworks strike of March 1938. Please welcome Dean Hershock for his lecture, Booted and Spurred, Railroads, the Range, and the Public Good, The Case of Williams versus the Michigan Central. Dean Hershock.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you all for being here today. It's wonderful to have an opportunity to use my academic brain rather than my administrative brain for a change. This is a wonderful event. I've attended these in the past, and I really appreciate being invited. It's a great honor. All right, so hopefully we can. I put together a bit of a PowerPoint. It's nothing too fancy. I'd intended to come back to it, but I had kidney stone operation 2 days ago and didn't get a chance to do it. So I think it'll cover what we need covered, and I look forward to talking to you. All right. Let's see. Is that going to move it? There we go. Sometime during the day on Saturday, June 23rd, 1849, several horses belonging to Edward Williams wandered away from his 80-acre farm in Wayne County's Romulus Township. And you can see the farm circled in red at the bottom of this map. It's about where Metro Airport is currently. Eager to make their way back to their former residence in Hamtramck, where they had recently been purchased, the animals retraced their steps, making their way north to the Chicago Road, today's Michigan Avenue, where they turned east and traveled along the road until they reached the town of Dearborn, some 16 miles distant from the Williams farm. Here, they were seen by locals a little before dusk on the tracks of the Michigan Central Railroad, which they had wandered onto via an unfenced portion of the rail running through the village common just south of the Federal Arsenal. So here's a map of Dearborn in the upper corner, and you can see the Arsenal, and you can maybe see the Michigan Railroad track run through there. And this is the location we're talking about. So they had wandered onto the railroad via an unfenced portion of the rail, which is just on the village common south of the Federal Arsenal. A few hours later, the unfortunate animals, now hemmed in by the railroad's fenced right-of-way and shrouded in darkness and the mist of an early summer rain, met their demise at the hands of a Michigan Central passenger train, just west of the bridge crossing the Rouge River. One can only imagine the horror of the scene and the heart-rending shrieks of the doomed animals that unfolded before the stunned passengers, not to mention, of course, the terror experienced by the horses themselves. A few months after the accident, Williams, relying upon township law that deemed livestock free commoners on unfenced land, brought forward a suit in Wayne County Circuit Court against the Michigan Central Railroad Company after it refused to compensate him the full value he claimed for his now useless property. Though his suit is the focus of what I want to talk about today, Williams was not the only Michigan farmer angry with the Michigan Central and with the company's unwillingness to sufficiently redress the livestock losses that they too were experiencing due to the railroad's operations. Indeed, miles to the west of Dearborn, in the rolling farmland of Jackson County, farmers with property along the tracks of the railroad found themselves grappling with the identical problem. Their animals were being killed by passing trains on unfenced stretches of track, and the railroad refused to make full restitution. Letters, petitions, protest meetings produced no resolution of the issue. In the face of corporate intransigence and a mounting death toll of livestock, farmers began to take matters into their own hands in the summer of 1849. They placed obstructions on the railroad. They tore up track. They derailed engines. They rendered their dead animals into lard and greased the track on upgrades. They burned wood piles. They even stoned and shot at passing trains. As one Calhoun County farmer explained in a letter to his local paper, "The road has been for a long time one gore of blood. No heathen altar ever smoked more continually with the blood of its victims. Horses and oxen, cows, sheep and hogs, all free commoners by law, the road not fenced, and yet we are told that the owners are the trespassers. They force their way through our farms, leaving our fields, meadows, and pastures all open as commons, and yet we are the trespassers if our stock pass over the road of their high mightiness and liable to them for damages. The road must be fenced. In the meantime, something near the value of property destroyed must be paid." As the attacks intensified, the Michigan Central, faced with diminished revenues and with its timetables in disarray, stepped up its efforts to snuff out the revolt, flooding the region with undercover operatives. After an alleged arsonist, whom the company later linked to the protesters, destroyed the Michigan Central's freight depot in Detroit late in 1850, warrants were issued, and nearly 50 of the railroad insurgents were arrested and brought to trial. Although the actions of the Jackson County farmers might appear astonishing and, is that me? It's the railroad, yes, exactly. Although the actions of the Jackson County farmers might appear astonishing and indefensible to the modern listener, and Williams's suit might seem ludicrous, the farmers, most would contend, should have taken better care of their livestock. Contemporaries would not have shared these dismissive views. Indeed, observers of the trials most certainly expected that Williams would be compensated for his property and that the Jackson County farmers would be acquitted on the grounds that they had been defending their legally established rights. When verdicts finally came down in the summer of 1851, especially in the case of Williams versus the Michigan Central Railroad, however, the injured parties' claims for compensation were denied, and their defense of traditional rights was repudiated. These rulings, breaking dramatically with customary community expectations and practice as they did, forever altered the traditional socioeconomic fabric of Michigan, and in the process helped to stimulate profound social, economic, and political change in the state. The 19th century American fencing law debate, which these cases exemplified, has garnered a good deal of attention from scholars. Though intensely studied, the meaning and ramifications of the controversy remain a subject of much debate. Some scholars have argued that the adaptation of fencing laws, the adoption of fencing laws, and the process of closing the range marked a watershed in the transition to capitalist values in the United States. Others deny the existence of any pre-capitalist ambivalence among the disputants and instead maintain that the conflict was one of interests clashing over material concerns. This talk's opening vignettes clearly illustrate that the preservation of traditional communal rights in the form of range laws was a prominent concern for Michigan's family farmers. An 1876 memoir, The Bark-Covered House, written by William Nolan, a member of a Dearborn, Michigan pioneer family, further illustrates the central role of the range in northern farm family subsistence. Shortly after the Nolans arrived in Dearborn in 1834, John, Williams's father, purchased 2 oxen and 1 cow. Nolan remembered that the family's free-ranging cattle, which young Nolan tracked daily across miles of timbered and newly broken farmland, were, for many years, the family's main dependence, and in his words, our standby through thick and thin. As the family struggled to clear its land, employing the free roaming oxen, and later as it worked to free the farm from a mortgage, potatoes and milk, and thickened milk, which were rolled lumps of salted, dampened flour boiled in milk, remained staples of the family diet well into the 1840s. Subsistence practices such as free-range grazing had been adhered to for generations back east, and thus they made perfect sense to the tide of Yankee settlers flooding into Michigan in the middle decades of the 19th century. The daunting task of clearing heavily timbered land and the lack of reliable transportation network throughout much of the era ensured that even the most commercially minded farmers would spend a substantial number of years subsistence farming. Making use of unimproved open land for grazing, foraging, or hunting was a fundamental element of that pre-capitalist subsistence strategy. The rights and the legal traditions that supported this ethos, however, quickly came under attack as the agents of the new capitalist order, particularly the railroads, increasingly sought to restructure state law in a manner compatible with commercial expansion and unfettered property rights. The emergence and timing of the fencing debate in Michigan resulted from several interconnected trends and specific occurrences. Among the most important of these was the state's belated recovery from the Panic of 1837. Throughout most of the 1840s, Michigan's economy languished and the state teetered on the brink of insolvency. In the last few years of the decade, however, Michigan experienced a pronounced turnaround characterized by sustained growth and heightened, I should say, economic activity. In part, the recovery was the result of the expansion of Michigan's rail lines, which offered residents direct rail connections to Chicago and the all-important Eastern Seaboard by 1852. The lengthening reach of the railroad radically transformed the state's farming economy and thrust Michigan's southern counties into the cash economy. So I highlighted there in yellow the route of the Michigan Central Railroad, so you would know where it ran at this point in time. Situated along one of the nation's main east-west trade arteries, southern Michigan was rapidly transformed into a center of market activity. Enticed by the opportunity provided by quick and reliable market connections, many farmers residing near the rail lines began to shift toward commercial farming. In the 5 years between 1845 and 1850, the gross tonnage of goods passing over the Central's rails jumped 415%. Ralph Waldo Emerson, an observer of this metamorphosis, marveled, quote, "A clever fellow was acquainted with the expansive force of steam. He also saw the wealth of wheat and grass rotting in Michigan. Then he cunningly screws on the steam pipe to the wheat crop. Puff now, O steam. Steam puffs and expands as before, but this time it is dragging all Michigan at its back to hungry New York and hungry England." Although these changes were welcomed by many, others, conditioned to fear commercial entanglements by the recent panic and safely ensconced in a self-provisioning lifestyle, approached this new boom period with a healthy dose of skepticism, ambivalence, and even outright hostility. This uncertainty assumed myriad forms in the state, manifesting itself most concretely in democratic political dominance with its attendant anti-market, with its market ambivalence and hostility toward monopolies. It also manifests in the unabashedly anti-market revision of the state's organic law in 1850, the new constitution of that year, again engineered by Democrats. And perhaps most dramatically, it manifests in the struggle to maintain traditional open-range privileges in the face of an emerging capitalist order embodied most tangibly by the state's flourishing railroad corporations. As Michigan's nascent railroads expanded their reach, these uncertainties were starkly highlighted. Traveling at the unheard of speed of 30 miles an hour, and jumped ahead a little bit, but we'll get here. Traveling at the unheard of speed of 30 miles an hour, the Michigan Central's engines were involved in many accidents with livestock that wandered onto the largely unfenced track. When similar accidents had occurred during the period of state ownership before 1846, state policy, partly dictated by political necessity, but also in keeping with local township and county ordinances that recognized livestock as free commoners, was to pay farmers the full amount claimed for their livestock. The Central's president, John W. Brooks, had no such electoral concerns. He therefore determined to make the farmers face up to what he interpreted as their own negligence by implementing a policy of paying only 1/2 of the appraised value of any livestock killed by the railroad. Farmers, construing Brooks's offer to pay anything at all as an admission of guilt, and bolstered by the state's open-range tradition and legal precedent, demanded instead that the company pay them full restitution. Though it might be tempting to conclude that the farmers' insistence on receiving full value represented a calculating state of mind characteristic of capitalism, as one historian has described it, the equation of concern for money with full-blown capitalist mentality may be too strong. Participation in and cognizance of the market did not always mean a complete acceptance of it. Strong argument can be made, in fact, that the Michigan farmers' insistence on full, even inflated compensation was adopted as a survival strategy in the face of an expanding cash nexus. Given livestock's importance in their day-to-day lives, farmers could not help but be aware of the cost of replacing their animals. This interpretation is further supported by the all too frequent claims made by the Michigan Central and its supporters that farmers inflated the value of their animals or that they intentionally drove sick and feeble animals onto the tracks. Certainly, some farmers may have done so. Others, however, may have claimed what seemed to be exorbitant values for their livestock because, in their self-provisioning world, livestock often represented a farmer's most valuable asset, short of real estate. If we can ignore the railroad for a moment, moreover, the fact that these farmers continued to operate on the fencing out principle is a strong indication that they were still, in many respects, pre-capitalist. Proponents of laws requiring the fencing in of animals, right? Fencing out, if you have crop, you build a fence to keep animals out of your field. Fencing in requires you to fence your livestock in. Proponents of laws requiring the fencing in of animals advocated such measures as a means of securing property rights. Furthermore, supporters of these laws argued that such measures would foster improved stock breeding, renew the fertility of land through manuring, facilitate the intensification of agriculture, and free up capital and labor required to maintain the extensive fences needed to enclose fields of crops for more productive purposes. All of these are trends, of course, associated with sort of a capitalist sensibility. It is inconceivable that Michigan farmers would have reacted with righteous rage to accidental railroad slaughter if they had already accepted the fencing-in notion that free-roaming stock threatened market crops. Again, Nolan's memoir offers a tangible illustration of this tension. After working diligently to clear a portion of his land and to construct brush fence around his fields, Nolan's father put in a small crop of wheat, a cash crop. The wheat came up and looked beautiful, Nolan recalled. One day, however, a neighbor's unruly ox broke into it. Young Nolan was told by his father to retrieve the ox and to take it home. When he arrived at his neighbor's house with the ox, Nolan told the neighbor that, quote, "His ox has been in our wheat and father wished him to keep his ox away." The neighbor replied that the Nolans must make their fence better and the ox wouldn't get in. The senior Nolan's desire to protect his market commodity from his neighbor's foraging ox and the neighbor's insistence upon traditional open-range privileges nicely illustrates a major tension spawned by encroaching capitalism, one that was brought to a head by the conflict between the Michigan Central Railroad and the farmers of Michigan. Up and down the Michigan Central line, the state's yeomanry reacted to the new challenge posed to their communities and to their way of life. But who were these individuals? Why were they involved in these actions? What was it that they hoped to accomplish? The evidence suggests that the individuals involved in the effort to preserve the open range in Michigan, though frequently connected to the marketplace, shied away from complete immersion in and acceptance of the emerging capitalist order. One can only speculate about why this was so. Perhaps these men resented their loss of economic autonomy to impersonal market forces and seemingly tyrannical corporate power, a loss driven home by their inability to preserve their traditional way of life and established rights against the incursion of the railroad. For others, traumatic experiences in the marketplace may have led them to reevaluate their priorities. Younger activists and those who were not yet established as independent producers might have felt insecure about their prospects in the emerging capitalist order. Others may have seen this as an issue simply as a matter of preserving the nation's Republican heritage and traditional property rights. Whatever the reason for their activism, these men clearly felt buffeted and threatened by the shifting world around them. And thus they reacted by attacking those forces most closely identified with commercial expansion. As shown, many of those involved in the reaction against the Michigan Central resorted to violence to vent their frustration. Indeed, the use of such violence, even against inanimate objects like railroad engines, further reflected these farmers' traditional ideal of personal face-to-face relationships. By and large, free-range activists ignored the courts and the organized structures of the state. In the main, Michigan's self-provisioning farmers remained suspicious of the legislature and the courts, believing that powerful corporate entities, such as the Michigan Central, could readily manipulate and control the structures of government. Accordingly, open-range activists fell back upon traditional community-based modes of direct action. Curiously, another of the activists in this movement to defend tradition, Edward Williams, who lost his horses to the Michigan Central locomotive near the town of Dearborn, did not adhere to this pattern. In most respects, Williams was typical of his fellow defenders of traditional rights. He was born in New York State in 1794. Williams, along with his wife and son, migrated to Michigan sometime between 1832 and 1836. 2 additional children born in Michigan completed the Williams household. Together, the family worked an 80-acre farm valued at a mere $252 in 1850 in Wayne County's Romulus Township. The Williams family fell far short of the mean wealth, $1,048, attributed to state farmers, and even further behind its Wayne County peers, whose farm values averaged over $1,800. The family seems either to have missed out on or chosen to opt out of the state's expanding commercial system. The 1850 census provides further evidence of the family's failure to adopt the modernizing trends of the day. Although 70% of Michigan's children between the ages of 5 and 19 were reported to have attended school, where the skills necessary to succeed in the emerging commercial world were taught in the previous year, none of the Williams children did so. Nonetheless, rather than responding in a personal manner to the loss of his property and the affront to traditional rights posed by the Michigan Central's refusal to compensate him for his dead livestock, as did farmers further west, Williams turned to the courts. It seems unlikely, given the above description of his life, that one could argue that Edward Williams was entirely comfortable with emerging market forces and legal institutions. Perhaps Williams's proximity to the state's main legal and commercial hub, Detroit, and thus his and his neighbors' long-term exposure to legal institutions explains his choice. Though Williams and his neighbors clearly participated in Michigan's cash economy, one cannot, therefore, infer that they were untroubled by their connections to it or by the personal loss of their autonomy to the system over which they could exert little direct control. On the contrary, Williams apparently took his independence very seriously and took aggressive steps to defend it. That Williams employed legal means rather than personal ones to do so may merely reflect the fact that the community in which he lived had already been transformed by an emerging capitalism that had rendered the world of personal interaction largely irrelevant and had begun to use law as an alternative to such personal confrontations. Conditioned to operate in the impersonal world of the market, Williams responded to his loss by resorting to the impersonal world of the courts. The Williams suit and the trial of the Jackson County conspirators brought to the fore an ongoing debate that up until this point had been actively waged along Michigan's country lanes, in isolated frontier clearings, and beside the hearths of the state's family farms. In these 2 highly publicized and symbolic cases, the emerging capitalist order had its day in court. Williams's attorneys argued that he was due compensation under the provision of the state's 1847 session laws, which provided that, quote, "No person shall recover for damages done upon lands by beasts unless in cases where, by the bylaws of the township, such beasts are prohibited from running at large except where such lands are enclosed by a fence." Given that the relevant Dearborn Township law deemed cattle and horses free commoners, and thus free to graze on any unfenced land, this line of reasoning maintained that it was incumbent upon the Michigan Central to fence its property or face the risk of litigation for damages done to legally grazing livestock. Concurrently, in a jam-packed court just a short distance away, the alleged Jackson County conspirators and their lawyers waged a similar battle on behalf of traditional rights. Painting the alleged conspirators as righteous victims of a tyrannical corporation, defense attorneys, led by New York's William Seward, denounced the monetary power of the Michigan Central, a power behind and above the government, a power that is seldom regulated by humane and just sentiments, a power that always seeks to crush those it cannot cajole. Prosecuting attorney James Van Dyke vehemently disagreed with these hostile characterizations of the railroad. The railroad and the broader changes that it represented, he professed, had done nothing but good in Michigan. Where heaven's light was once shut out by dense forests, it now shines over fertile fields and rich, luxuriant harvests. Hope and energy sprung from their lethargic sleep. Labor clapped her glad hands and shouted for joy. A detestable monopoly. These railroads built by United Energies and Capital are great instruments in the hands of God to hasten onward the glorious mission of religion and civilization. The question facing the state Supreme Court in the Williams case and the Detroit jury that was hearing the case of the Jackson County conspirators and the residents of Michigan was clear. Which of these competing social visions should prevail? Would traditional open-range community norms or the common law principle of unhindered personal property rights triumph? Michigan's Supreme Court offered the first response in July of 1851. Oh, all right, now I need to try to go back. All right, that's not going to work. Thank you. Saved from the back of the room. Michigan's Supreme Court offered the first response in July of 1851, affirming the Central's assertion of an owner's culpability for livestock killed on its tracks. The idea that because horses and cattle are free commoners, they have therefore the lawful right of trespassing on private property is absurd, preposterous in the extreme, Justice Abner Pratt asserted in his majority opinion. What are free commoners? Where may they run? Pratt continued. Surely not on individual property. In legal contemplation, the justice continued, the railroad is neither a public common nor a public highway. Accordingly, he argued, the voters of the township of Dearborn could not, by any power vested in them by the legislature, confer upon the plaintiff the right of grazing cattle and horses on lands granted to the defendants exclusively for the construction and use of their railroad. Concluding with a flourish, Pratt asked if railroads corporations should, quote, be compelled to assume the guardianship of all the stray cattle, horses, and swine found strolling along the track of their railroad. Most certainly not, he chided. The owners are the only persons to look after them, and if they do not, it is but just that they should suffer the consequences of their own negligence and wrongful act, of their own want of care in the protection and preservation of their own property. On September 25th, 1851, a Detroit jury determined the fate of the Jackson County conspirators. 20 defendants were acquitted, 12 were convicted and sentenced to prison terms varying from 5 to 10 years. These two decisions marked the end of Michigan's long-standing open-range tradition and dealt a devastating blow to the state's self-provisioning family farms. These court decisions did not, however, mean the end of the struggle to preserve traditional rights or to limit corporate power. On the contrary, the furor in defense of the open range and pre-capitalist values continued unabated. Indeed, Justice Pratt himself, a Marshall Democrat, offered a method of redress to the state's aggrieved farmers, while conceding that according to the company's charter, the Michigan Central was not required to fence its road for the protection of domestic livestock. It was possible for that same body to correct this oversight. Whether the charter contains powers and privileges which were improvidently granted by the legislature is not a question to be considered here in deciding the case, Pratt argued in Williams versus Michigan Central. In limiting the competence of the court in this manner, Pratt pointed out a path forward. What the lawmakers had given, the lawmakers could also take away. The anti-railroad hostility generated by the open range debate persisted throughout Michigan between late 1851 and 1855 and joined with a host of other emergent issues: local school control, temperance, nativism, and most famously opposition to slavery's expansion into the Western territories, to create a very volatile political climate here in the state of Michigan. That environment quickly boiled over, and Michigan's Jacksonian party structure crumbled. As mentioned, a great many political undercurrents played a role in eroding the old party foundations. But frequently overlooked in the story is the critical role played by hostility to the state's railroads, a hostility that was in good measure created by the attempt to preserve a vanishing lifestyle in the face of sweeping transformation. Similarly ignored is the central role played by this issue in the formation of the new Republican organization that was established in Jackson, Michigan in July of 1854. Although the bulk of the new party's platform focused on the alleged machinations of the slave power and the need to prevent the spread of slavery into the Western territories, delegates to the Jackson meeting also adopted a plank pertaining to state affairs. At the heart of this plank was the following resolution: resolved, that in our opinion, the commercial wants require the enactment of a general railroad law, which, while it shall secure the investment and encourage the enterprise of stockholders, shall also guard and protect the rights of the public and of individuals, and that the preparation of such a measure requires the first talents of the state. The new party's surprising victory in the 1854 state election enabled the fledgling organization to act upon this plank. The Republican administration immediately moved, sorry, I've forgotten my slides here. There's the meeting under the oaks in Jackson. The Republican administration immediately moved to placate anxious state residents by pardoning the Jackson County conspirators. The railroad conspirators were pardoned. Moreover, consideration of a general railroad law became a top priority for the new Republican legislature. In a revealing letter to Governor Kinsley Bingham, Isaac Christensen, one of the chief architects of the new party, presented the importance of such a measure plainly. What contributed to the unpopularity of the last legislature more than anything else was the impression among the people that they had been too much influenced by railroad companies and neglected matters of general interest to the people. Now, unless our legislators set their faces like flint against all these special favors to incorporated companies, our Republican triumph is at once blown to the winds. In late January 1855, the Republicans succeeded in passing the General Railroad Law. While the law opened the door for the creation of new railroad corporations, it also contained many prohibitions that addressed the concerns of a very different group of Republican voters, those who viewed the party as a means of preserving an older and a rapidly waning lifestyle. Accordingly, all new railroads organized under the Act, as well as those already operating in the state, were required to install upon their locomotives bells and steam whistles to be sounded before all grade crossings. They had to post warning signs at crossings. They had to fence the right-of-way, and they were required to install special farm crossings with cattle guards where needed. By passing this law, the Republicans had lived up to a very important political promise and had reassured, or at least tried to reassure, tradition-bound Michiganians that their rights were once again safe. Such a limited victory, however, did not, and of course could not, change the fact that the tradition of self-sufficient farming was in decline, and that one of the key pillars of that tradition, the open range, had been toppled. One of the main elements of the state yeomanry's self-provisioning lifestyle had been circumscribed. No more could the John Nolans of the state loose their livestock to forage freely upon the unfenced lands of their neighbors. No longer could they look upon open land that they did not own as a resource available for communal use. A symbolic shift had occurred in Michigan law, and the culture of unfettered capitalism had gained the upper hand. So, I think the case of Williams versus Michigan Central Railroad, while it's a relatively obscure case, is an incredibly important one for what it reveals about these profound social and economic changes that were occurring not just in Michigan, but elsewhere across the United States in the period around the Civil War. So thank you for your attention today. I appreciate your time, and thanks, Carl, for inviting me.
Thank you, Dean Hirschach, for that fascinating lecture. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate seeing you all and for your support. See you again next time.